Let me ask you something blunt. When you wake up every morning, are you actually living your life or just checking the boxes that somebody else wrote for you? If you can't answer that without hesitation, then odds are you're on somebody else's script, maybe your parents, your bosses, your cultures, or even your own fear of disappointing people. And if that's true, then let's be honest, you're not living, you're performing. Here's the deal: if you keep running someone else's playbook, you will wake up one day exhausted, resentful, and wondering why your life never felt like yours. The cold truth is this: no one is coming to hand you back the steering wheel. If you don't take responsibility, you'll keep driving down a road you didn't even choose. And when the bill for that comes due, it's not your mom, your friends, or your boss who pays, it's you. Awareness is the first domino, and without it, nothing else really matters. You can't change what you refuse to see, and you certainly can't fix what you won't admit exists. Most people walk around in life thinking they are making choices, but in reality, they're running on autopilot, following old patterns, habits, and expectations that were installed long before they even had a chance to decide if those beliefs worked for them. Awareness is that critical moment when you stop and say, hold on, why am I doing this? Who told me this was the way? Do I actually believe this? Or have I just been carrying it because it's familiar? Think of awareness as turning the lights on in a dark room. You can't clean up a mess you can't see. You can't dodge obstacles you don't know are there. When you refuse to look at yourself honestly, you end up stumbling over the same problems again and again, telling yourself stories like, this is just who I am, or this is just how life works. The truth is, most of the time, it's not who you are. It's just who you've practiced being. And until you become aware of that, you'll stay locked in cycles that don't serve you. Awareness also requires courage. It's not about casually observing your life. It's about being brutally honest with yourself, even when what you see isn't flattering. That might mean admitting that you're living for other people's approval instead of your own purpose. It might mean realizing that the career you've invested years into doesn't actually excite you. It just keeps you safe. It might mean recognizing that the relationships you've been hanging on to are more about avoiding loneliness than building real connection. These realizations aren't easy, and that's why a lot of people avoid them. They stay busy, distracted, and numb so they don't have to face the truth. But here's the problem: denial doesn't protect you, it just delays the pain. The cost of avoiding awareness is that you never get the chance to live fully. Another thing about awareness, it doesn't just show you the problem, it shows you your role in the problem, and that's where growth begins. For example, if you're constantly drained by people in your life, awareness forces you to ask, am I setting boundaries, or am I allowing this because I don't want to deal with confrontation? If you hate your job, awareness asks, am I actively exploring new opportunities, or am I choosing comfort over courage? If you feel stuck, awareness makes you look at the decisions you've made or avoided that have kept you there. This isn't about beating yourself up. It's about owning your reality so you can start changing it. The domino effect comes in once you let awareness do its job. The moment you see clearly, you can't unsee it. When you become aware that you're living by someone else's script, every time you make a choice, that awareness taps you on the shoulder. It asks, is this really you, or is this borrowed? That one shift creates momentum. Suddenly, you're not sleepwalking, you're awake, questioning, and taking ownership. From there, every other change, setting boundaries, defining values, taking risks becomes possible. Here's the catch, though. Awareness is uncomfortable, and that discomfort is where most people tap out. They see something they don't like about themselves or their life, and instead of sitting with it and using it, they shove it back in the drawer. But discomfort is the price of freedom. You can't get to a life that's yours without first getting real about what isn't yours. So the very thing that feels painful, the honesty of awareness, is actually the doorway to everything you want. Awareness also isn't a one-time event. It's a practice. You don't just wake up one day fully aware and stay that way. Life has a way of pulling you back into old routines, cultural pressures, and fear-based choices. Awareness is a muscle you keep strengthening. It means regularly pausing to check yourself. Am I on autopilot again? Am I defaulting to what's safe instead of what's true for me? That ongoing self-check keeps you aligned and keeps you from slipping back into old patterns. To put it plainly, awareness is where responsibility starts. If you won't own your awareness, you won't own your choices. And if you won't own your choices, then your life belongs to whoever is loudest, strongest, or most persistent in pushing their agenda on you. Awareness hands you the mirror, and once you've looked into it, you have two options: ignore it and keep drifting, or face it and start steering. The people who transform their lives are not the ones with the most talent, money, or luck. They're the ones who had the guts to stop lying to themselves, the ones who chose awareness over denial. So if you're asking yourself whether you're living your life or someone else's, the first step is simple but not easy. Pay attention. Pay attention to your choices, your motives, your energy, and your emotions. Where do you feel alive and where do you feel drained? Where are you making decisions out of fear? And where are you making them out of passion? That's awareness. And once you build that awareness, the first domino falls, setting off a chain reaction that changes everything. Ownership beats excuses. And until you grasp that truth, you'll always find yourself stuck in the same cycles, repeating the same disappointments. Excuses are seductive because they let you off the hook. They create a story that makes you feel like you're not to blame. But the hard reality is this: the moment you start handing out excuses, you're also handing away your power. And when you give up power, you stop being the driver of your own life. You're essentially saying, this isn't up to me, which is just another way of saying, I'll stay stuck. But excuses can sound pretty convincing. I can't pursue my dream because I don't have the money. I can't leave this toxic relationship because I don't want to hurt anyone. I can't start over because I'm too old. Each of those statements might contain some truth, but they're not the whole truth. They're half truths designed to keep you comfortable, to protect you from the discomfort of taking action. Ownership says, yes, those obstacles exist, but they don't get to dictate my outcome. I do. Ownership doesn't deny challenges. It just refuses to make them an excuse for inaction. When you adopt ownership, you're shifting the focus from what you can't control to what you can. Excuses are always rooted in the external, other people, circumstances, timing, luck. Ownership is rooted in the internal, your choices, your resilience, your commitment. Let's take an example. Maybe you grew up in a household where your parents pushed you toward a career you never wanted. If you're still in that career today, blaming them might feel justified. But here's the truth: you're an adult now. They might have influenced the beginning, but you are the one deciding to stay. Ownership doesn't mean they weren't controlling. It means you refuse to let their control write the rest of your story. One of the reasons people resist ownership is because it feels heavy. If you're responsible, then when things go wrong, it's on you. That can sting. But here's the paradox: the same weight that feels heavy is also the key to your freedom. The moment you accept that your outcomes are tied to your decisions, you realize you actually hold the pen to your life. That's empowering. You no longer have to wait on someone to rescue you, to apologize, to change, or to give you permission. You can take the wheel right now. Excuses, on the other hand, keep you small. They keep you waiting for conditions to be perfect, and conditions are never perfect. There will always be bills to pay, always be risks, always be critics, always be reasons why no isn't the time. People who live on excuses never launch, never commit, never change. They keep telling themselves someday stories until one day they realize their whole life was just a string of delays. Ownership is also about language. Pay attention to how you talk. If you often say things like, I have to, or they made me, you're speaking from a victim stance. Ownership changes that language. I choose to, I allow, I decided. That small shift in words is a massive shift in mindset. Saying, I choose, might feel uncomfortable at first because it puts the spotlight on your role. But that spotlight is exactly what gives you the power to choose differently next time. Another thing about ownership, it's contagious. When you take responsibility for your own life, people notice. You stop being the person who always has a reason why things didn't work out. Instead, you become the person others can trust, respect, and count on. That doesn't just change how people see you, it changes how you see yourself. You begin to carry yourself differently because deep down you know you're not a passenger anymore. You're driving. Now, ownership doesn't mean everything is your fault. It doesn't mean ignoring real injustices, trauma, or hardships you didn't cause. What it does mean is this: those things might explain how you got here, but they don't excuse you from deciding where you go next. Life may not always be fair, but the responsibility to respond is still yours. That's the piece you control, and that's the piece that determines your future. Without ownership, growth stalls. Think about it: if it's always somebody else's fault, then you're powerless to fix it. But if you own your part, you can change your part, and that can change everything. For instance, if a relationship keeps failing, you can blame the other person, or you can ask, what patterns am I bringing in? What boundaries am I failing to set? What choices am I making that keep leading me here? That's ownership, and that's where transformation begins. At the end of the day, ownership beats excuses because it's the only path to freedom. Excuses lock you in place no matter how reasonable they sound. Ownership opens the door to possibility, even if it's uncomfortable. Every time you hear yourself leaning on an excuse, stop and ask, what part of this is still in my control? What can I own right now? That question alone can be the difference between another year of stagnation and the first step toward the life you actually want. So the challenge is simple, even if it isn't easy. Stop outsourcing your life to circumstances, to other people, or to fear. Own your choices, own your outcomes. Because when you do, you trade the temporary comfort of excuses for the lasting power of freedom. And that's a trade worth making. Boundaries protect freedom, and that may sound like a contradiction at first. A lot of people hear the word boundary and think of walls, restrictions, or shutting people out. But in reality, boundaries are not about building prisons. They're about creating safe space. They are the lines that protect your time, your energy, and your sense of self so you can actually live in alignment with who you are. Without boundaries, your life doesn't belong to you. It belongs to whoever demands the most from you. Think of boundaries like the fence around a home. The fence doesn't mean you don't want visitors. It just makes sure people come in through the front door instead of barging into your bedroom. At 2 a.m., boundaries define what's acceptable and what's not. And when you enforce them, you teach others how to treat you. Without that clarity, people will push, pull, and take until you're drained. And here's the thing, it's not because they're necessarily evil or malicious. It's because you never gave them limits. People treat you according to the standards you enforce, not the standards you hope for. When you don't set boundaries, you pay a high price. You say yes when you want to say no. You overcommit, then feel resentful. You tolerate relationships that drain you because you're afraid of conflict. Over time, this erodes your sense of self. You start to feel invisible, as if your life is just one long reaction to other people's needs. That's not freedom, that's servitude. Freedom comes when you say, here's where I end, and you begin, here's what I'm available for, and here's what I'm not. The challenge is that most people confuse boundaries with rejection. They think, if I set a limit, I'll hurt someone. If I say no, I'll push them away. But boundaries aren't rejection. Their definition, they actually make relationships healthier because they replace silent resentment with clear expectations. When you communicate your limits openly, the people who respect you will adjust. The ones who don't respect you, they'll either push back or leave. And honestly, if someone can't tolerate your boundaries, that's a red flag that they weren't invested in a healthy relationship to begin with. Another reason people avoid boundaries is guilt. They feel selfish for prioritizing themselves. But self-respect is not selfishness. In fact, without boundaries, you end up giving from a place of depletion instead of abundance. You burn out, and then you're no good to anyone. Boundaries allow you to give freely when you choose, not out of obligation. It's the difference between helping because you want to and helping because you feel trapped. One comes from love, the other from fear. Boundaries also give you clarity about your priorities. If you don't protect your time and energy, other people's priorities will always override your own. You'll spend your life chasing obligations instead of building dreams. For example, maybe you want to start a business or get healthy. Without boundaries, you'll keep saying yes to every request, every distraction, every guilt trip until there's no time left for you. With boundaries, you carve out space for your non-negotiables and you treat them as sacred. That's where real growth and freedom come from, choosing what matters most and protecting it fiercely. Enforcing boundaries is not easy, especially at first. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries will often resist when you start setting them. If you've always been the one who says yes, your first no will shock people. They might push harder, manipulate, or guilt trip you. That resistance isn't a sign that you're wrong. It's a sign that the system is adjusting. Every time you hold your ground, you're retraining people on how to engage with you. And eventually, the people who value you will adapt. The ones who don't will fade, and that's okay. One of the most powerful truths about boundaries is this: you can't control how others respond, but you can control how consistent you are. Boundaries don't have to be aggressive or rude. They can be calm, respectful, and firm. For example, instead of lashing out with "stop bothering me," you can say, "I can't commit to that right now." Instead of letting someone dump negativity on you for hours, you can say, "I hear you, but I don't have the capacity to talk about this right now." Boundaries are about being clear, not cruel. It's also important to remember that boundaries apply to yourself as much as they do to others. It's not just about saying no to people. It's about saying no to your own bad habits. Setting a bedtime, limiting your scrolling, sticking to a budget, committing to exercise, these are all self-boundaries, and when you honor them, you build trust with yourself. That trust is the foundation of freedom because you know you can count on yourself to protect what matters. At the end of the day, boundaries are what make freedom sustainable. Without them, your energy, time, and emotional bandwidth get hijacked by whoever yells the loudest. With them, you reclaim ownership of your life. You create space for what fuels you, not just what drains you. And you give others the gift of clarity. They know exactly how to engage with you without crossing the line. So if you want freedom, you can't avoid boundaries. You can't hope that people will just figure it out. You have to draw the line, communicate it clearly, and enforce it consistently. It will feel uncomfortable at first, but that discomfort is temporary. The freedom and respect you gain are permanent. And the truth is, if you don't protect your life with boundaries, else will. Clarity creates courage, and that principle can completely change the way you live. Most people think courage is something you either have or don't have. They believe some people are naturally brave while others are just wired to play it safe. But courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being clear when you know exactly what matters to you, when your priorities and values are sharp and undeniable. Courage rises almost automatically. Clarity strips away the noise of doubt and confusion, and what's left is the determination to act Even when fear is present, fear thrives in vagueness. When you don't know what you want, when your values are fuzzy, when your goals are half-formed, fear fills the gaps. You end up paralyzed because every choice feels uncertain. You hesitate because you can't tell which direction is right. You stall because you don't want to make the wrong move. Clarity solves that. It says, this is who I am. This is what matters. This is the direction I'm going. Suddenly, fear has less room to run wild because even if the road is scary, at least you know which road is yours. Think of it like driving in fog. When the road is blurry, every move feels dangerous. You grip the wheel tightly, you slow down to a crawl, and you second guess every turn. But when the fog clears, the same road doesn't feel nearly as terrifying. Nothing about the road changed, your vision did. That's what clarity does in life. It doesn't remove the challenges, it just removes the guesswork. And once you see clearly, you find the courage to accelerate. Clarity comes from knowing your values, your purpose, and your non-negotiables. If you value freedom, you'll find the courage to leave a job that suffocates you. If you value authenticity, you'll speak up even when it risks disapproval. If you value growth, you'll push through discomfort to try something new. When your decisions line up with what matters most, you stop obsessing over what other people think because you've already decided what you think. That inner conviction is what fuels courage. The opposite is also true. Without clarity, you get stuck living by other people's values. You take the safe job because your parents approve. You stay quiet because your friends don't like conflict. You stay in a relationship that doesn't fit because you're afraid of judgment. Deep down, you may feel restless or trapped, but without clarity, fear wins the battle. You don't move because you don't know where you're supposed to move. That's why clarity isn't just helpful, it's essential. Another powerful thing about clarity is that it simplifies decisions. When you're clear on your priorities, saying no becomes easier. You don't have to agonize over every invitation, every opportunity, every demand for your attention. You can measure it against your values and see immediately whether it fits. That doesn't make the decision painless. Fear may still whisper, what if they're upset? What if you fail? But clarity answers back with a stronger voice. This aligns with who I am, and that's enough. That's where courage is born. Clarity also provides resilience. Life will throw challenges at you. No question, fear will show up, doubt will show up, but when you have clarity, setbacks don't shake you as much because you know why you're on the path in the first place. For example, an entrepreneur who's clear about building a business to create freedom for their family will find the courage to endure financial risk, long hours, and uncertainty. A person who's clear about leaving a toxic relationship will find the courage to endure loneliness for the sake of peace. The pain doesn't disappear, but the clarity makes the courage to endure it possible. It's important to understand that clarity doesn't mean having every detail figured out. You don't need a 10-year plan to live with courage. Clarity means knowing the essentials, what you value, what you will and won't tolerate, and what direction you want to move. The how can unfold along the way. Too many people wait for perfect clarity, thinking they need to see the whole staircase before they take the first step. But real clarity is often just about the next step. Once you take it, more of the path comes into view. So how do you get clarity? You slow down and ask yourself hard questions. What energizes me? What drains me? What would I do if fear and approval didn't matter? Who am I trying to please and why? If I only had 5 years left, what would I regret not doing? These questions cut through the noise and reveal what's real. Clarity isn't about adding more, it's about stripping away the lies, the expectations, and the distractions until the truth of your life is undeniable. Once you have that clarity, courage stops feeling like something you have to force. It becomes the natural next move. You may still feel fear, but fear no longer has the final say. Courage doesn't mean you aren't scared. It means you're more committed to your clarity than you are to your comfort. And that's what sets people free. At the end of the day, clarity creates courage because it gives you a reason strong enough to move through fear. When you know who you are and what matters, you stop living on autopilot and start living on purpose. Fear doesn't vanish, but it loses its grip. And when you choose clarity, you're not just choosing information, you're choosing power, because the person who is clear about their life will always find the courage to live it.